A white man in a soaked suit knelt beside three black girls at their mother's funeral and whispered something that made the oldest one freeze in shock. Gasps rippled through the church as every eye turned toward them. What he said changed everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The stained glass windows of St. Mark's Baptist filtered the overcast daylight into bruised colors that puddled across the pews and pulpit. The air inside was thick with incense and restraint. Every whisper hung like smoke, thin, acrid, impossible to ignore. In the center aisle stood three little girls in matching black dresses and white patent shoes, hair in tight braids with ribbons too bright for the occasion. Their eyes didn't roam the crowd. They looked only at each other or down at the casket where their mother lay in a silence that had outlasted all apologies. Amaya, the tallest by a fraction, held both sisters' hands tightly, as if she alone bore the weight of holding them upright. Zaria trembled in stillness, her lower lip caught between her teeth, trying not to cry. Kendall's gaze never left the casket, her expression unreadable, her body too still for a child. They were 6, but the room treated them like shadows, acknowledged only in hushed tones or avoided entirely. Rows of pressed suits and polished hats filled the pews, yet not one adult had reached out a hand, not one auntie from the neighborhood church, not one elder from the choir. Their mother's life had been deemed inconvenient, her death doubly so. She had lived in a white family's guest house and birthed children with no listed father. This alone had made her the subject of endless side-eyes and suburban speculation. The triplets were her echo, and for many in that church, they were the scandal made flesh. The pastor, Reverend Tillman, kept his voice low and respectful, but even his eulogy trembled with tension. Sister Tasha was a woman of quiet strength. She gave more than she ever took. But when he said, "She was not alone," he didn't gesture to the girls. No arm extended, no names spoken. A cough, a creak of wood, a stifled scoff from somewhere near the front. "Let's not pretend she didn't choose her path." Another voice, quieter but sharper. "Shame the girls look so much like him." Still, the girls didn't move. Not when the choir hummed a hollow hymn, not when someone dropped a program, not even when the casket was closed. Then the back doors opened with a bang that felt accidental, but sounded like judgment. Heads turned. Rain blew in with the figure who crossed the threshold. A tall white man, out of breath, rain-soaked and stunned. He stood still, scanning the room until his eyes locked on the 3 girls. And for the first time in an hour, Amaya looked up. The floorboards creaked beneath his footsteps, a sound that echoed like gunfire in the suddenly breathless sanctuary. Dr. James Whitmore moved as if through water, slow, heavy, every eye dragging against his skin. His face, chiseled and pale, held the fragile tension of a man walking willingly into judgment. The back of his neck was damp from rain, but his hands, those steady surgeon's hands, trembled ever so slightly. No one had seen him in this part of town in years, and certainly not here, not today. He was Whitmore blood, 3rd-generation legacy of the St. Joseph Medical Board, son of Judge Catherine Whitmore and real estate magnate Robert Whitmore, Jr., a name whispered in the halls of courthouses and cocktail parties with reverence and fear. For the people in that room, he didn't belong in a sanctuary like St. Mark's, unless it was to shake hands during an election cycle. Yet here he was, shoulder to shoulder with grief. He stopped, 3 feet from the girls. From his vantage, he could see the bow in Amaya's ribbon had come slightly undone, that Zaria's small shoulders trembled with a sob she refused to release, that Kendall's stare had tunneled into some unreachable place. And in front of them, Tasha, still, composed, unreachable forever. James's throat closed with guilt, the kind that didn't fade with time or conscience. It rooted, deep and enduring, like rot in the bones. He crouched down, not to their level but below it, and looked up into the uncertain faces of the daughters he had never claimed. "I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner," he said, and it cracked as it left his mouth. There was no performance in his voice, only ruin. Only a man who had chosen silence when it cost him least and now found the price had bankrupted everything that could not be bought back. Amaya blinked, confused. Zaria turned slightly toward him. Kendall did not move. Then James leaned closer, voice hushed but shattering. "I'm your father." Gasps burst across the room like shrapnel. Some people sat upright. Others leaned forward, lips parted in stunned recognition. Amaya's eyes widened, not with joy, not even anger, but with the kind of shock children aren't meant to carry. A slow, uncertain calculation began behind her gaze, as if the pieces of every unanswered question were trying all at once to find where they fit. James didn't flinch beneath the weight of her stare. For once in his life, he chose not to look away. The city hadn't seen a scandal like this in decades. It didn't simmer. It detonated. Every morning show, every evening headline, every scrolling banner online carried the same name, Dr. James Whitmore. But it wasn't his medical accolades or his surgical genius that made the public lean forward. It was the revelation that the blue-blooded son of Atlanta's elite had fathered 3 black daughters with the housekeeper and walked away from them. The hypocrisy was irresistible to the press. A Whitmore caught in scandal was gold. A Whitmore undone by race, class, and betrayal, that was fire. Conservative pundits spat about morality, while liberal circles dissected the racial dynamics with feverish obsession. Talk show hosts fought over who would get the first exclusive. Old family photos surfaced. Snippets of courtroom footage were looped endlessly. Late-night comics weaponized punchlines. But beneath the entertainment was something more volatile. Truth. At the epicenter stood James, no longer hiding behind a stethoscope or press releases from the Whitmore Foundation. Cameras caught him walking into family court wearing the same dark suit from the funeral. No tie, no smile. Just a man who had stopped asking for redemption and started demanding it. When he filed for full custody, the internet split in two. Some called him brave. Others labeled him a calculated opportunist chasing absolution in the court of public opinion. But no one could ignore the move. It was bold, public, irreversible. A declaration of war against the very system that once protected him. His resignation from the hospital shocked even his critics. Colleagues called it career suicide. James called it step 1. Then came step 2, the bombshell. While his mother, Judge Catherine Whitmore, stood on the courthouse steps declaring him emotionally compromised, James held his own conference just 1 hour later. But he didn't bring lawyers. He brought receipts. First, a string of emails, veiled threats, veiled payoffs, offers to make the problem go away. Then texts, crude and desperate. Finally, the centerpiece, a video diary from Tasha Brooks herself. In it, she sat in a dim-lit room, tears slipping down her cheeks, voice steady as she named names. She spoke of betrayal, isolation, fear, of warnings from the Whitmores that no one would believe a maid with brown babies, of how she stayed silent, not out of shame, but to protect her daughters. The silence was shattered. And suddenly, the headlines changed. The villain wasn't the man who confessed. It was the family that had tried to erase the truth. And now, their faces were no longer hidden. The wind was soft that morning, rolling through the fields like a hush meant to protect sacred things. The farmhouse stood proud behind them. White-painted wood, navy shutters, and a porch swing that groaned gently with the rhythm of new life. It wasn't extravagant. It wasn't meant to impress. But it was theirs. James stood beside the car, watching as the girls scattered toward the small hill beyond the trees, where sunlight kissed the stone that bore their mother's name. Tasha Brooks. Beneath it, newly engraved in soft gold script, beloved mother, fierce heart, never forgotten. The flowers weren't plastic now. They were wild-picked and fresh, hydrangeas and buttercups, woven with intention and placed with reverence. He walked slowly behind them, no longer the man who once kept his secrets like armor. His gait was looser now, his eyes no longer clouded by the weight of who he'd been expected to be. The world that once orbited his last name had shattered, and in the wreckage, he had found something worth becoming. Kendall was the first to speak, tracing the letters on the headstone with her fingertip. "She would have liked it here," she said, not looking at anyone. "It's quiet." Amaya nodded. "And there's space to breathe." Zarya knelt down, a ribbon slipping from her hair, and leaned in close to the stone. Her voice was barely audible, but James heard every word. "Mommy, we're okay now. Daddy found us." There was no choir this time, no polished speeches, no eyes burning into them from across a church aisle. Just sky, wind, and truth. The kind that didn't need to be shouted to carry weight. James crouched behind them and pulled the girls into a loose, quiet embrace. They didn't flinch. They didn't pull away. For the first time, they leaned in. His mother had lost her title. His father had disappeared into the anonymity that follows disgrace. The Whitmore name no longer unlocked doors, but it no longer built walls either. And that, James thought, was worth every cost. As they turned to leave, their footsteps in sync, the camera would have caught a single, final frame. A white man with lines on his face but peace in his posture, holding the hands of 3 black girls who no longer looked lost, not because the world had changed, but because they had changed it, together.